I don't know necessarily where it comes from or how I got it, but I have a sense of responsibility as a person who is able, financially and energy-wise, to do things to help other people. My interest in doing this video, and it's been a difficult decision for me because I don't like to feel like I'm bragging about things that I've done. But I hope that whether it's my family or anyone else that views this, that they'll be able to see how little it takes from us to help somebody else so much. And I think that came to me the most vividly with the sponsorship of the kids and elders, because what it costs me to go out and eat today, just for myself, is almost as much as a monthly sponsorship. And families respond to me that they were able to put a new floor in their home that's always been dirt, or put a tin roof on their house that's always been thatch that had to be replaced every season. The people that write for the elders will say, we've never been able to afford medicine that might have helped some of the deterioration they're experiencing. And something as basic that we would think of as it's made our life and our elders' life so much better because we can afford adult diapers for her. And I don't think people realize when they wander through a store and they see something, I think I'd kind of like to have that, and maybe they keep it 6 months and then they're done with it, what they could have done with that amount of money for other people. And so whether it's the sponsorship of people, sending coffee coupons to deployed soldiers, helping build water wells, building schools, it's very little to me for what it amounts to for the people who receive it. My family were the ones that really instilled this in me. My parents were older than most of the parents of kids my age. They'd come through the Depression themselves. My dad had been in World War II, came home. They were starting out. My mom didn't work. My dad did. But no matter what our financial situation was as a family, tithing to their church was an absolute. And sometimes it was spoken and sometimes it wasn't. But we grew up knowing that that came first and that they had a belief that if they did that first, then everything else that the family needed would happen. During the time that I was working for DCFS, I met my first life partner, who also worked at DCFS, which made kind of an interesting situation because in those days, being gay was not something, especially when you were working with children, that was a very safe thing to share with people. And it was interesting because we even worked in the same office and stuff. So it was a camouflage kind of career for quite a few years. But when we first got together, I was not aware, and it became more and more obvious over the period of time that she was an alcoholic. And so for the first 9 years of our relationship, she was becoming more of an alcoholic and I was becoming more of a codependent, try to make everything work and solve the problem. So eventually, in year 9 of our relationship, I did an intervention and she went to treatment then in Decatur. And after she got out of treatment, we got very heavily involved in AA and Al-Anon. And we actually did some group facilitating for other people that were going through treatment and their families. About a year into her recovery, we were contacted by some mutual friends, another lesbian couple who were from the Litchfield and Hillsborough area that were both in AA. And they said, when an AA meeting is over, mostly the men in the AA groups would come over to our house and they're going, okay, so now we're sober, but how do we live? And they were sitting around the kitchen table with Mary Kay and Mary drinking coffee going, I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to do laundry. I've never had to take care of my own home. My wife threw me out because of my drinking. Now what do I do? So they came to us and they said, we need to start a place where people who've already gone through treatment and they're supposedly sober, but they don't know how to live sober. They need a place where they can live together and learn from each other and learn all these life skills. So we started looking for a place to do that. And there was a huge home in Hillsborough that was for sale on a bank auction. And it had actually been a part of the Underground Railroad. I mean, it was a big old brick house, but I thought this would be great for a group living situation. So we made a bid on it, and God was taking care of us. We did not get the bid. How in the world we would have been able to make that into what we wanted after we paid the amount that we bid would have been impossible. But I remember that Christmas in particular because in November was when we put the bid on, and right before Christmas we found out that we didn't get it. I was so mad at God I didn't know what to do. It was like, this was supposed to be. We were supposed to get that place. Why didn't you let us get it? And we all felt that way. Well, in February, Mary Kay or Mary was driving through the little town of Irving, which had a population sign that said 650, but there weren't that many people living there anymore because the coal mines had closed and so many people had moved away. And the grade school that was in that town no longer had enough students to keep it open. So the grade school had been sitting empty for like 2 years. And they called us up and they said, I know it's February and it's going to be cold, but can you get down here? There's a building we need to look at. So the man that had been the custodian took us through this 3-story brick building with classrooms for K through 8th grade, a gymnasium, an auditorium, a square block of property, and the town really wanted somebody to buy it before it got vandalized or whatever. So while we were walking through it, we said to the custodian, do you have any idea what they might want for this building? And he said, I don't think they know. They just want it not to belong to the town anymore. So Mary Kay and Mary went to the town council meeting and threw out a bid of $10,000 for this block of property and 3-story building, and the town accepted it. When we started the remodeling to change the classrooms into rooms for 3 people per classroom, we realized that we had a cafeteria and a kitchen that was already public health certified, all the stainless steel, that kind of thing. It already had a fire alarm system and fire escapes that rang at the local fire department. Everything that we would have had to do to that old brick house that we bid on and were so mad that we didn't get was already in this building. When we started the remodeling and had to get it appraised for insurance, they appraised it at $246,000. And it's still operating now, 37 years later. Has capacity for 12 men and 4 women. And they live cooperatively. They do all their own meals, their own grocery shopping, their own laundry. They keep the building clean. They take care of the yard. Everything they need to know to learn how to live sober, and they can stay there as long as they feel like they need to. And the town was not real thrilled about it when they first heard what was going to be there. It was like, well, we don't want a bunch of drunks living in our town. But since they've been there, they started a recycling program for the town, and they actually pick the stuff up and take it somewhere themselves as the residents there. They provide lawn service for any of the older people in town that need help with their lawns and stuff. And now they've got a working relationship with some local animal group. I don't know if it's the County Humane Society or whatever, but they take dogs there and they train them. They can use the gymnasium and stuff for training. They've got all that property to get out and walk them, and they just try to get them to the point where they're more socialized so they're more likely to be adopted. And they've got a huge bulletin board of all the dogs they've had and the adoptive couples and stuff. So it's served the people as well as the community a great deal. We never thought it would be able to survive because we had no funding. We didn't have the certifications necessary to take insurance from people. As soon as they arrived, we got them on public aid, and that was back in the days when people on public aid got food like going to pantries and getting these big rounds of cheese and bags of cornmeal and stuff. It all came back to the kitchen, and that's what they used to fix their meals. Coffeen Lake was nearby. They fished, brought back fish and cleaned them, and they brought back a kitten which was almost dead that somebody had dumped, and I had her for 21 years. New Beginnings was my sanity. I had been at DCFS long enough that, it was like, I've got to get out of here for a while. And I then was so deeply invested in the 12-step recovery program. Barnes & Noble wasn't here. Walden Books wasn't there yet. There was no place that people in recovery could get material about recovery except stuff like the Big Book. Then I had all of this background in helping people in all kinds of social service situations, whether it was divorces or LGBT issues or raising kids or having survived sexual abuse, as well as all of the 12-step programs, Overeaters and Emotions Anonymous and all of that kind of thing. So I opened this bookstore that was specifically focused on those self-help kinds of images. And I had the background to be able to know what to order and to what to suggest to people. And it was interesting because it kind of became a place where people went to see their therapist and then they came and talked to me and looked at books. And I had a cat, a store cat, that somebody had called me one day and said, I don't want to have to take her to the pound, but my kids are allergic to her. So she came to the bookstore and I named her Survivor. And I know there were a lot of customers that came there just to spend time with Survivor, because she would get in anybody's lap, she would curl up in anybody's coat. Nobody that came in had to care about cat hair because they were going to get some. But they would come and I could talk, they would open up to me about what they were struggling with, and then I could help them find books to match that issue or special order something for them. And it was interesting because one of the things that kind of became almost common was that I had decided I was going to be open about my involvement in 12-step programs, my background in social services, and my orientation as a lesbian woman. People would come in with whatever issue it was they were working on, and because I had the background in social services, we did a lot of almost like counseling for free at the bookstore. And the reason I feel like this is one of the most fulfilling places for me in my career was to be able to do that with none of the state paperwork. I didn't have to take case notes. I didn't have to write up the results of it. But people would come back and let me know something had been meaningful or a book had been very helpful to them. And then I started to connect with the therapists in town, and they knew me as a resource. The employee assistance people from the hospital would call and said, we're working with somebody and here's the issue. I want to send them over. What have you got that you can give to them? So unfortunately, I was really beginning to create quite a network about the time the bigger bookstores came to town. And I just couldn't stay afloat. A person ordering 1 or 2 books at a time gets no break on them as far as price. You can't raise the price because it's already printed on the book. And but they were wonderful years for me. And something I've got as a memento of that is the 12-step programs sell a lot of coins to celebrate people's anniversaries and stuff. And some of them are just what they call motto coins. And there was one that said, expect a miracle on it. And I think it had the Serenity Prayer on the back. And even though I didn't have a lot of money by the time I decided I was going to have to close, I bought 100 of those coins. And toward the end, every time somebody came in and bought something, I gave them one of those coins, and I had written up a little card that talked about the affirmative thinking of expecting a miracle. And I said, carry that with you all the time. And when you get what you feel was a little miracle, I've got a book in here, and I want you to come back in and write that story in that book for me. And then pass the coin on to somebody else along with the card about them carrying it and expecting a miracle. And I still have that book with a lot of stories in it that people came in. And they were all the way from going off and leaving the iron on and not realizing it and coming home and there hadn't been a fire that there could have been, to somebody getting a job that they'd been hoping to get or whatever. But I go back and read the stories in that quite often. My retirement was partially of necessity and partially a God thing. I was at a point where I felt like financially I could retire, although I was only 55. I grabbed the state's opportunity if you had enough years in and you were 55 to take early retirement. And I wasn't sure financially how that was going to work. But I had to have the time to me. In the space of the year prior to my retirement, my father had been diagnosed with cancer and died. He and my mother had been married 63 years, and after he died, she didn't want to live anymore. She was healthy, but she just didn't want to still be here. So within the space of 5 months, she died, partially because she wouldn't take her medicine and didn't want to eat and just kind of got crazy. And then the person who was my life partner at the time met somebody else and left. My closest college friend, who was kind of the one that was the person that said, well, you can come up and stay with us for a while after my dad died and after my mom died and when I knew my relationship was ending, she was killed in a car accident. And by that time, we're between November and February of 2001 into 2002. And at Christmas time, I got one of the famous mailings of the Heifer International catalog of Christmas gifts. I'd never heard of Heifer International, but this catalog was all of these animals, page by page, with little stories about how if you purchase this animal for a family somewhere else in the world, they would benefit from it. But the thing I liked the most was their whole gift-giving concept is you receive something, and then when the first baby of the animal you were given is born and old enough to reproduce, you give that baby to somebody else in your community. So it was a gift that just kept on giving and giving and giving. And with some animals that have multiple births, sometimes, it was exponential. And I sat there and I read that catalog alone by myself at Christmas time. Well, my father had died. My mother was in the hospital at that time. And I thought, this is my light at the end of the tunnel. I can get involved with something like this and feel like I'm really doing something that's significant, but it's going to save me. So that was the first organization I got started in, and I took off with it, guns loaded and raring to go. I started going on some what they call study tours, where you go with heifer staff to a country where heifer is working, and you meet the farmers that receive the animals and hear their stories and stuff. So in the period from 2002, when I retired, to 2011, I went on 7 of those trips to different countries around the world and met the people and heard the stories, again, of what something as inexpensive as $30 for a flock of chickens or $60 for a start of geese or ducks, up to $250 for a water buffalo would help a family. The water buffaloes are my favorite. They give milk, they give meat, they give transportation, they give manure for composting farm crops. They can help a farmer produce more than 4 times what they could if they were having to till fields alone and that kind of thing. And then their baby goes to somebody else, and it just felt like a way that you could give so little from your own pocketbook that created so much when it went out into the world. And so then I started finding these other organizations where I could do the same kind of thing. And that got me into water wells and building schools and sponsoring kids and, 20 different organizations. The tale of the starfish has been part of my experience and meaning to me for a long time, but it took on a special meaning when I decided I was going to start sponsoring children. It's a story of a little girl that's walking along a beach, and all of these starfish have been washed up by a storm, and they're going to die there in the sand if they don't get back in the water. So she's just wandering along, and she's picking one up at a time and just flinging it back into the water. And an old man comes along and sees her doing this, and he comes up kind of accusingly to her, saying, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I'm trying to save these starfish." And he said, "There's thousands of them out here. You can't save them." And she picked up another one and she tossed it in, and she said, "Well, it made a difference to that one." And so I think that's where I felt like when you get so overwhelmed by hearing about the needs in the world, and you think, what could just one person do? How can I possibly impact this whole, whether it's the Ukrainian refugees or whether it was the Darfur, genocide, you feel so helpless. But when you find an organization that allows you to be directly connected to just one child, then you feel like, yeah, I'm really making a difference for that one child, especially when you get the response from them about what your sponsorship has meant to them. So right after I started doing that, I found in a catalog jewelry that was starfish, and I wanted to send one to each of the kids, but you can't send objects, you can only send letters. So I had these bracelets made for myself, and one of them says, "It made a difference to that one," and the other one says, "One starfish at a time." And except for one airport security guy that was really adamant, I haven't taken them off since I got them. And so it's a constant reminder, along with the letters I get back from them, about, what a difference just a small amount of money to me means to them and their families. And they refer to themselves as the Starfish family when they write back to me. And I'll tell them, like when an elder has died, maybe I've gotten another elder or I've picked up another kid, and I'll tell them a little bit about that when I write letters to them. And they always reference, oh, I'm so glad to know we have somebody else in the Starfish family, or I hope everybody in the Starfish family is doing well. Probably the most significant organization that I've been involved with since 2013 is Unbound. They are a religiously backed organization, and that was started by some Jesuit brothers. They have families that people can sponsor in multiple countries around the world. And they have a wonderful website where if you decide you want to sponsor somebody, you just go in there and they have all the pictures of the people that are available. And they're the only organization that has both children's sponsors and elder sponsors. No other humanitarian organizations work specifically with elders. So I got interested in splitting my sponsorships between those. And the first two I picked from their website, you can actually select whether you want a male or a female, the country you want them from, an age group or whatever, or you can just leave it open-ended, and it gives you all these people that you can pick from, and then you just pick one and let them know, okay, I'm going to sponsor that one. So the first one that I sponsored, and she was only 2 years old at the time, was this little girl in Honduras by the name of Liz Demi. And the neat thing about Unbound is that the families receive the money directly, and it's up to them how that will benefit their family the most. So what I've learned from some other Unbound sponsors is always pick the youngest child in the family. Because if they're not in school yet, the family doesn't have the school expenses and uniforms and books and that kind of thing to spend the money on, and they can improve the household for everybody until that child is old. Well, she was only 2 at the time, so her only siblings were all teenagers by then. So they were already old enough to be helping with their coffee farm and that kind of thing. So I found out for the first few years that I sponsored her and sent extra money at Christmas time, they were able to pour a concrete floor in their home. They'd always had dirt floors. The second year, Christmas money went to a tin roof on the house. It had always been thatch. And then by the time I got there and met the family in Honduras, they had added a kitchen on for Mom. She'd always had to cook outside or inside with all of the smoke in the house from her farm. So she's the only one I sponsored that I've actually met, but this is the whole family, Mom and Dad and the 4 older siblings and her. And she's in 4th grade now. We're not to the point yet she's been able to actually write her own letter to me. Mom starts the letters out, but she colors pictures to send with them. I now have 11 kids. They're in another one in Honduras. They're in Armenia, Syria, India, the Philippines. 2 of them are what they call student scholars. They're older kids that have gotten through grade school and high school and are in some kind of training, or the girl in India is in nurses training. And then the elders that I've had have been in the Philippines, Mexico, Honduras, and I haven't had them as long because when you get them and they're older, I've had several that have died and I've gotten new ones. But they're socially isolated for the most part. They're in countries where their homes have been destroyed by typhoons and this kind of thing. But the organization Unbound has, like for the kids, the mothers usually are in a mother's group that's like a support group for all the kids, and they do the same thing with the elders, and they have social things for the elders. They have Christmas parties and birthday parties for them and that kind of thing. And when I was in Honduras, we got to go on one of the food deliveries for the elders. And they had all these huge food boxes and stuff, and we drove out to where all of them lived to deliver those. And one of my elders was going blind. I had supplied some extra money for her to be able to see a eye doctor, but he said there, at her age there wasn't really anything they could do. But she and I had shared that we both were really into flowers and flower gardening. So for one of her birthdays, I printed a kind of a coloring book picture of a basket of flowers with the happy birthday ribbon on the front of it, and I colored that with every color I could think of, to put in those flowers and stuff and send it to her. And her daughter's letter back to me said that she really did not have enough sight at that point to tell much, but that there was something on this piece of paper. But she would hold it and she would rub her hands on the picture and say, "This is so pretty. It's just so pretty." And she would ask her daughter to get that out periodically so she could feel it and see it through her fingers. So those are the kinds of things that, what's $30 a month for that kind of return experience? Luz Marina is my newest that's considered an elder, although she's not as old as the other ones, but she's in their elder selection because she's handicapped. She's schizophrenic, and she lives with her sister or sister-in-law who basically has to, kind of keep an eye on her, basically. She said, she can go into the community and visit with somebody or whatever, but they keep a close eye on her. And I've just gotten her in the last few months, but it so happens that she had a birthday coming up right after I got her. So I always I keep a calendar to remind me like 2 months ahead of time to send birthday stuff, because the mail and the translations of letters and stuff before they get to people take a while. And I just Friday got a letter back from her sister who writes her letters for her, saying, she said, "Bless you for sending birthday greetings to Marina. She was so pleased. She's 67 years old, and she had never had her birthday recognized by anyone before." And that's just something I try to remember to do with all of the kids, and adults. Never occurred to me that it would be such an unusual event for somebody. This piece was something I ran across because I'm very fond of Native American spirituality, and the author is Charlotte Tallmountain. And when I read through this, I thought, this is what I would like for my obituary to be able to say about me. And I think it's been a part of my life for about 10 or 12 years. And I read back through it periodically, almost like a checklist, like, I think I've done something toward that one and that one and that one. For the love of the world, for the love of a tree, she went out on a limb. For the love of the sea, she rocked the boat. For the love of the earth, she dug deeper. For the love of community, she mended fences. For the love of the stars, she let her light shine. For the love of spirit, she nurtured her soul. For the love of a good time, she sowed seeds of happiness. For the love of the goddess, she drew down the moon. For the love of nature, she made compost. For the love of a good meal, she gave thanks. For the love of family, she reconciled differences. For the love of creativity, she entertained new possibilities. For the love of her enemies, she suspended judgment. For the love of herself, she acknowledged her worth, and the world was richer for her.